That's right, as the title suggests for this video, Sonic Movie 3 is the best Sonic movie so far. But if you don't want to take my word for it, take the word for all of the reviewers that have reviewed this movie so far. Because as of right now, this movie is sitting at 88% on Rotten Tomatoes with 113 reviewers, or sitting at a 96% at an audience reviewer with over 5,000 different reviews on this movie. Or for the simple fact that this movie has already surpassed $200 million worldwide so far. And this is just 10 days apart from the actual movie's release date of December 20th. Not only is this huge for Sonic movie, potentially meaning that more movies are to come, but this is also huge for Sega and the Sonic the Hedgehog series, as this could give the games a bigger budget, but also allow other Sega titles to completely thrive under how much money they're making from this movie alone. But if that alone isn't enough to convince you to watch this movie, well, let's talk about it. But obviously there is a spoiler warning ahead, as I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some of the spoilers around Sonic Movie 3, so beware of that. I think the most notable thing to talk about is pretty much the main character of this entire movie, and that's Shadow. Shadow is definitely the most anticipated and hyped up person that's going to be appearing in Sonic Movie 3, and he is very much shown as the main character, but also the main villain at the same time. Yes, obviously Sonic is a huge part of the movie. I mean, the movie is literally his name, but a big interest for this movie for me personally was completely around Shadow. And before I get too deep into Shadow as a character throughout this movie, let me just ask, how did Paramount make one of the coolest characters in gaming history even more cool? Shadow is written extremely well inside of this movie. A lot of his backstory is twisted in a different way, and a lot of that stuff isn't the same as what the games are with Adventure 2 or even Shadow 2005. But I kind of like that about this, is that a lot of the backstory is different, and it isn't as predictable as, say, going completely as the script of Sonic Adventure 2 does it. I like that they kind of twisted some things some different ways, but I'll kind of get into some of the twists later on in this video. A big thing that this movie does is make Shadow look completely unstoppable throughout the entire movie. Because 95% of the movie, Shadow is just absolutely destroying everybody in his path or anybody that disagrees with him. Nobody stands a chance, and that even goes for Team Sonic. Shadow within the movie literally stops Team Sonic all by himself without breaking a sweat. It's really only towards the end of the movie that Shadow kind of somewhat gets beat by Sonic in his supersonic form, and that's for talking about Tom about how he injured him earlier on in the movie. But this is also after the point that Shadow literally hits the Chaos Emeralds out of Sonic completely and ends up taking the super form away from him and causing them both to go super to have some insane fight between them. We actually don't see Shadow use a bunch of Chaos abilities inside of this, but he still ends up being really badass. You see him use the Chaos Snap and teleporting like crazy back and forth while destroying a bunch of gun soldiers, and also doing this with the bike, but we never really see him use Chaos Control or anything like that at all. At least that we know of. My theory is towards the end of the movie, the reason why Shadow ends up living in the end credit scene is going to be the simple fact that he used Chaos Control to stop the Eclipse Cannon from destroying the Earth. And that's also why I think that Eggman probably is not dead. Jim Carrey has obviously stated that he very much would like to go into retirement soon, and even stated that he decided to come out of retirement to do Sonic Movie 3, and that could potentially mean that Jim Carrey could sit out potentially for Sonic Movie 4, but I really don't see that happening, as Eggman is such a big part of this, and Jim Carrey truly carries the entire movie. But back to Shadow. Not only do you have all the things that we talked about with Shadow, you also have a bunch of fan service completely surrounding this character. You're not only hitting his insane Sonic Adventure 2 pose with Super Sonic in space, but you also have the likes of the gun and the bike added to the movie as well, just adding so much more fan service. The entire time of him teleporting around with the bike and then shooting the gun that he ends up picking up off the floor, I just couldn't help smile through all of it, as I know it doesn't probably make a lot of sense for people that don't know a lot about the Sonic series watching this movie, and it's just kind of another cool scene to them. But overall, just the meaning of the gun and the bike, and seeing that Paramount and Sega would end up bringing that back for Shadow this year is just so damn cool to see, and I'm so glad that they kept this to Shadow. Obviously, he's not running around saying damn or anything like that, and it would have kind of been a little cool Easter egg if he said something like that, but we don't need that. I think the bike and the gun are great. And potentially the most notable thing to talk about with Shadow is his voice actor in Keanu Reeves. Now, Keanu is definitely one of the most wanted voice actors for Shadow for a very long time since the Sonic movie 2 end credit scene of Shadow being revealed, as a lot of people think that his voice would fit really well for Shadow. And I, for one, was someone that really wanted to see Keanu join the cast of the Sonic movie. I mean, he has such iconic roles, and overall, he's just an amazing actor. But obviously, he doesn't have a bunch of voice acting experience. And I think that really shows in this movie. I know a lot of people are starting to kind of complain and say that Keanu's take on Shadow wasn't great. And in a way, it kind of reminds me of that SpongeBob clip.
But I don't like pistachio!
Then why did you ask for it?
Because if we wanted this so much and Paramount delivered with that, why are we complaining about the voice of Keanu for Shadow? I think the point is a lot of times in certain scenes, it's really hard to just not hear Keanu from Shadow. It just kind of feels like I'm watching a movie about Keanu Reeves. And his voice doesn't sound any different from the likes of John Wick or The Matrix or even Speed. He just doesn't sound very different in a lot of his roles. And that's great that it works for him. It's just for Shadow, it makes Shadow feel a little flat. There isn't a lot of expression from Shadow at all. And when you're comparing it to the likes of Kirk Thornton that has been doing Shadow for quite a while now, it's night and day difference how different they actually are of Shadow. I personally much prefer the emotion and overall how his take is on Shadow with Kirk. I do think with more time to come and seeming like Shadow's going to end up sticking around in these movies, that Keanu is going to continue to improve his Shadow, and I hope in Sonic Movie 4, if he ends up being in that he's going to improve his voice with more movies and potentially shows and commercials to come of the Sonic stuff. This isn't the worst take on Shadow, but it isn't the best by any means. I would say that's my truly only complaint about Shadow, is just sometimes the voice acting from Keanu is a little flat and lackluster. But Keanu is a pretty monotone guy, so it's pretty hard to kind of judge it in saying that he doesn't have enough emotion. I think that's just kind of how he is as a person. But this is what I wanted. I wanted Keanu to be in the movie, and I wanted him to voice Shadow, and I'm not going to complain because this is exactly what I wanted from the movie. But speaking of legendary actors, we have to talk about Gerald and Robotnik with Jim Carrey. This has been said in the first and second movie, and this goes without saying in the third movie, that Jim Carrey again carries these movies. His role for Gerald and Ivo Robotnik are incredible, and he does such an amazing job. Keanu has stated already in interviews that he really thinks that Jim Carrey deserves an award for his performance of acting for not only one but two characters inside of the movie, and the two main villains at that. The dedication and hard work that Jim Carrey put into this movie really shows inside this movie. There are some amazing scenes, they're funny, they're serious, but they're also just incredible characters. The whole scene of the push the button scene of them dancing is incredible. The fact that he is able to pull that off while playing both of these characters is insane. And Paramount truly deserves a round of applause alongside Jim Carrey on this. Gerald obviously being in the movie was a pretty big change from Sonic Adventure 2, and I don't mind them kind of making him be around more, as he's always been a character that I've really been interested in, as he's always been really mysterious and we don't know a lot about him. And with this, we kind of learn a little bit more about his backstory within the movie universe, which is great. And I'm glad that Gerald, we ended up getting a lot more information, not only in Sonic X Shadow Generations, but also within this movie, and this year has been really full of Gerald information. I really enjoyed the moments between Gerald and Dr. Robotnik inside of this movie. They're truly great. And even when it gets towards the end of the movie, it's even better. Not only do you have the crazy fight scene between the two of them using different gadgets to fight each other, but also just the emotion of Gerald telling Robotnik that he's no Maria really just hits you in the heart, showing that he was just using Ivo this entire time, and that the world deserves to suffer for what they did to Maria. I will say that the end of Gerald is pretty anticlimactic in my opinion, of him just kind of disappearing. Him just kind of getting poked in the ass by a supersonic quill was a pretty bad ending to such a interesting character. Like I said, Gerald is a very mysterious, serious, and a very unknown character to us Sonic fans. We only see very bits and pieces of him in Adventure 2, and now in Sonic X Shadow Generations we finally have some more information on him going into this movie. The ending to having him kind of killed off just wasn't really what I was personally expecting from such a big character in the movie. But this is definitely more towards a kid's movie than anything, so what can you really expect? Of course, they're going to try to make it look funny, having a character die in the movie. But another amazing moment at the end is when Eggman sacrifices himself to save Earth. The whole speech of, if he can't rule the world, he might as well save it, is amazing. And if this is truly the end of Jim Carrey as Eggman, what a way to go out. From having Gerald go out such a bad way, if this is truly the end of Eggman, this is by far one of the best endings that any Sonic character has had inside of the entire series. But like I said, I don't really expect him to be dead, as Shadow does take off his inhibitor rings to stop the Eclipse cannon from crashing down. And I really think that Shadow decided to save Dr. Eggman while using chaos control with having his inhibitor rings unleashed. Because once he unleashes his inhibitor rings, is anything really going to stop Shadow? He's just that powerful. He truly is the ultimate life form. But with talking about the main villains and bad guys inside of this movie, I suppose it's time we talk about Team Sonic. For most of the beginning of the movie, we kind of see Team Sonic kind of celebrating Sonic's birthday, and ultimately, I wouldn't say that I super care about this part of the movie. I personally don't truly care a bunch in the movie about the whole family life that they kind of have going on, and I more care about the action of everything. And like I said, Shadow was kind of my main focus within this movie, so I kind of wanted to keep seeing what Shadow was up to. But the one thing I really do want to applaud this movie is 10 minutes into the movie, you already have so much action and it completely jumps into action right away. It's not until a little while later that you finally get to Team Sonic and see what Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are up to. But even so, it's pretty quick for them to jump in to find Shadow and end up fighting him. One thing I will say about Sonic is it does really seem like he's starting to age within these movies, from going from the first one of him kind of acting kind of like a little kid to moving to now where he's still a little immature at times, but overall he's more of a teenager and a little bit more mature now. I very much prefer the way Sonic acts in movie 3 opposed to the first movie. And we even see Sonic kind of go enraged later on in the movie, which I actually really like to see, as it's not an emotion that we see a lot from Sonic. But whenever we see Sonic kind of angry or enraged, it's always an interesting thing to see how he's going to act, as Sonic very much gets determined to completing to whatever he needs to be done, and at that moment it was stopping Shadow. One thing I do really like in this movie is the interaction between all of Team Sonic, as they have some really great moments with each other. They have some really funny moments, but also some really great team building moments as well, to really build the bond and the friendship between all three of them. I really like that they decided to kind of keep Knuckles with them instead of him going off and doing his own thing. I know that he kind of somewhat did that in the Knuckles show with Wade Wimple, but I like that he kind of somewhat went back to Team Sonic and stuck around with them. And I very much think that Idris Elba does the best take on Knuckles that we've seen so far, as this is personally my favorite Knuckles. It's a great mix of what we're used to with old Knuckles, of him being a lot serious but not as educated in certain things and is really liking to fight different things, and within this movie that thing being Shadow. But it also has a great mix of him being kind of a comedy character at the same time that we're used to in the likes of Sonic Boom. The Sonic Boom cartoon, I think, does a great job at Shadow being kind of a silly, kind of less educated character. And I like that this is kind of the mix of the two, where he's a guardian, but at the same time he's very silly and goofy at the same time with Sonic and Tails, as this is personally my favorite Knuckles that we've received so far inside of the series. One thing I'll say about Tails within this movie is he doesn't have a bunch of lines in the movie. I mean, he is definitely very much a side character within this movie, and I feel like he doesn't nearly talk as much as Knuckles or Shadow or Sonic. But I do think that this is an improvement on his character from movie 2, as he feels more like Tails with each movie that he's in, where he's more of the brains of Team Sonic, but he's also using a lot more gadgets as time goes on. That's what we know Tails for. And I like that he doesn't feel like he's hopeless like he kind of seems like in modern Sonic games. He still seems like he can be somewhat independent and still be very strong and still truly believes in himself. No pun intended with his theme song from Adventure 2. But the thing that I actually want to talk about the most is genuinely just the Sonic and Shadow crazy fight scene. Like I said a little bit earlier, is Shadow ends up knocking out the Chaos Emeralds from Super Sonic, and they end up touching the Chaos Emeralds at the same time to causing both Super Sonic and Super Shadow to happen at the same exact time. What's crazy is Sega ended up keeping this an entire mystery from us from the get-go. In the trailer, we see that Shadow kind of pulls off a insane, like, blocking move from Sonic. But actually in the movie, the reality of it is this was Super Shadow blocking the entire punch inside of the movie. They ended up completely editing this in the trailer to not spoil Super Shadow being in this certain scene, which is pretty damn incredible. And it makes the scene just go even more harder. And it's a really cool thing that Paramount and Sega decided to keep this a secret, as it was a really hype moment in the movie. And it was a thing that I was really excited that I didn't get spoiled about. But these two just beating the absolute hell out of each other is insane, and honestly the best moment of the entire movie is just Sonic and Shadow fighting each other in their super forms, as this isn't something that we really ever see that much, as the two super forms fighting each other. I believe the only other time that we truly see this is in Sonic X. Otherwise in 06 or Adventure 2 they end up fighting with each other, or they just individually turn super in their own games. So seeing them completely go all out on each other is insane. But for most of it, it is Super Shadow just kind of beating the hell out of Super Sonic until Shadow kind of says some things about Tom and Sonic goes crazy. But this ends up leading to them sitting on the moon and kind of figuring out each other and kind of learning that they're not as different as they may think they are, as they're kind of two sides of the same coin. Where Shadow in a way kind of lived a similar life to Sonic, it's just his family was taken away from him with Maria. Sonic kind of felt what that was like when Shadow ended up hitting Tom and almost potentially killing him. And this ends up kind of being a big factor in the movie of why these two end up becoming friends and end up teaming up each other to save Earth. But also it does really show that Shadow has the will and the spirit of Maria, of her always being happy and always thinking the best of people, which ends up bringing up the most legendary dap up of all time, with Sonic and Shadow dapping each other up and Live and Learn playing. Is the most insane thing in the movie is hearing Live and Learn just play as these two completely blast off into space and transform into Super. This is just such a highlight of the movie, and you truly just can't help but smile and get hyped up while watching this movie while this is going on. But this also leads into them going absolutely insane and destroying every robot in their path, and then ending it off with the legendary SA2 pose. Super Sonic and Super Shadow, in my opinion, were the highlight of the movie, and this is my favorite moment by far. And I hope if they continue to have Shadow in the Sonic movies, I would love to see him kind of be within the main fight with Sonic again, as I would really like Shadow to be the main character with Sonic going forward, as Shadow definitely had the entire year dedicated to him. I think if this year proves anything, it proves that Shadow deserves to be one of the main characters in the series again. Another thing to talk about is nostalgia and just the little Easter eggs that go pretty crazy in this movie. There's obviously a bunch of Easter eggs. I'm not going to go over every single little one inside of the movie, but I'll mention a few of them. Nostalgia-wise, obviously the story is quite a bit different from Adventure 2, but it still keeps a lot of the themes of Adventure 2. They ended up changing quite a bit with the likes of Shadow's creation, saying that he came from a meteor, which in a way is kind of like half right in a way, since the Black Arms come in a meteor, and Black Doom ends up sharing his DNA to create Shadow. But it isn't entirely right. I guess that's just kind of a simple way of putting it, and maybe they'll explore more of the Black Arms or potentially his creation in later movies, as they were really focusing on the whole Shadow Maria thing at this point in the movie. And that was a really big thing, is the whole Shadow and Maria thing felt really nostalgic, but really new at the same time. As seeing Shadow and Maria together is always an amazing thing, and obviously a thing of the past, which makes you feel really nostalgic. But at the same time, it's really new because we never really get to see a lot of the interactions between the two characters back then. You see Shadow being happy and playing with Maria a lot and kind of acting like a kid in a way, where he's smiling, doing snow angels and cake, and even dancing with Maria or watching movies. This is a side of Shadow that I really like to see, is where he's actually happy and he's actually enjoying life. And he's not seen as such a monster all the time, or simply the ultimate life form. He's just another hedgehog. One interesting thing that they decided to change in this movie is Maria's sickness, as they never mention it at all, and it kind of seems like she's not sick whatsoever. Instead, she's just a grandchild wanting to spend time with her grandfather and ends up making a friend in Shadow. I think it's fine to kind of write her that way, as a sickness isn't a big thing about her character. I think if they were in space instead of being on Earth, I think they definitely should have had it where the sickness was like that. But they kind of leave it unanswered on why she's around this base so often and why she lives there. Because the whole purpose of her going with Gerald in the past in the games is because of her sickness, and they bring her to space, and that kind of slows down her sickness from spreading in her and helps her live a lot easier. But overall, I really enjoy the moments that we get with Maria and Shadow, and Maria's actor does an amazing job at playing Maria, and I think that overall this moment is great. When it comes to Easter eggs, the few Easter eggs that I'll mention is going to be one, the famous line of Sonic jumping out of the chopper, of the whole talk about low budget flights, no food or movies, we're out of here. I very much at this point in the movie did the whole Leonardo DiCaprio meme of just pointing at the screen and being like, oh my god, he said it! I couldn't help myself at that point. Like, I was expecting it, but I didn't know if they would actually do it, and I love that they did at least decide to include that Easter egg. That genuinely made me so happy. And also, the other Easter egg that I really enjoy is Eggman's phone ringing. When Agent Stone ends up calling him in the movie to warn him about Gerald's plans, it ends up playing his theme from Sonic Adventure 2 of the Eggman theme. It's just a very small little snippet of it, and you can kind of barely hear it, but I love that they decided to include this. I felt like it was such a perfect thing to put in the scene, and it just overall made me really smile in the movie. And of course, the most nostalgic and Easter egg inside of the entire movie is simply just the amount of times that Live and Learn is teased inside of the movie and then eventually being played as a whole in the super scene. I'm so glad that even through everything and all the situations that's going on with the lead singer of Crush 40 suing Sega about Live and Learn, and that Johnny was still able to promote the movie on his Twitter and everything like that, and it really seems like he has no hard feelings about everything. If you want to be a little bit more educated on that situation, go on Johnny Gioli's Twitter page, and he kind of explains the situation that's going on of him not getting paid for Live and Learn for the amount of games that it's been in. I hope that he ends up getting paid and that all ends up being water under the bridge between the two, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see with that. I suppose the last thing that we should probably talk about is the end credits. I already mentioned one earlier on in the video of Shadow still being alive and picking up his inhibitor rings, which is a great end credit scene to end off the movie, ensuring that Shadow is alive and going to stick around potentially in the next movie. But obviously the most hype and crazy one is going to be the end credit scene of Metal Sonic and Amy Rose being announced. Metal Sonic is such an amazing pick to be the next villain, and I think is going to be great and going to take a lot of inspiration off the likes of Sonic CD, but also the Sonic OVA movie, as I think the OVA characterization of Metal Sonic is probably his best to date. And I think we'll see a lot of really cool scenes from that and a lot of inspiration from that movie. And obviously with CD, a big character within that is going to be Metal Sonic and the likes of Amy. The really amazing thing that I really love about this is not only her design looking incredible, I think she's probably the best looking character besides Shadow inside of this entire movie if this is the look that they're going to go forward with in Sonic Movie 4. But also it looks like she's actually very independent and extremely strong. Amy comes in throwing her hammer, destroying a bunch of Metal Sonics in his way, and saving Sonic. Typically, as we're used to within the old games, we're pretty used to Sonic saving Amy, but I actually really like that they make her seem a lot more strong, and it seems like they're going with her more modern personality in this, where she's a lot stronger and independent and isn't so relying on Sonic, and I think that's how they're going to completely write her in the movie. Now, I'm really interested to see who ends up acting for Amy in the future, and I can't wait to see how they end up writing her into the movie and see how big of a character she'll end up being. But we're starting to get quite a few characters inside of this movie now, so I'm interested to see how it all plays out, and I think that Sonic Movie 4 is going to be a lot more original of a story than Sonic Movie 3 was, where Movie 3 was definitely playing and tugging on the nostalgia strings of Sonic Adventure 2. While I think that OVA and CD will take a big inspiration, I definitely think that Movie 4 is going to be in a lot more of an original movie, and I can't wait to see how that ends up playing out. But that's kind of entirely my thoughts about the movie. I really don't have much to complain, as this is definitely the best movie of the three so far. The only complaints that I truly have is sometimes with Keanu, and obviously Sonic being a little cringy at moments, as I do think that Sonic is definitely a lot different in terms of personality when it comes to the movie side opposed to his game side. But like I said, this game is suited for everyone and is definitely more targeted towards the kid audience, and I totally understand Sonic acting like that for that purpose. It's not that I have a problem with him acting that way, it's just not my preferred Sonic, if I can say. And then Gerald's death. I would have liked him to go out a little bit better than he actually did, but overall the movie is great. The pacing of the movie, the action of the movie, the comedy of the movie is all incredible, and I truly can't wait for them to make more movies, as Sonic Movie 4 has already been announced. So if you want to continue to see these movies come out, go watch this movie as much as you possibly can, because the more this movie ends up making, the more movies they're going to end up producing. It's going to be pretty crazy to see if Sonic Movie 4 can potentially outshine Sonic Movie 3, as with how well this reviewed and how well this is being received by fans from not only the Sonic side, but overall just movie enjoyers. It's going to be really interesting to see how Sonic Movie 4 can possibly top this, because this movie was incredible and you need to be watching it. But with that being said, guys, let me know in the comments below what's your favorite Sonic movie so far, and I'd love to know what you guys think of Sonic Movie 3 in the comments below. But with all that being said, guys, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.